Yo, welcome back to another episode of Redzone In the Lab. I am Deuce, and joining me today is NFL Analyst Mark Bulluck. We're going to look at the Commanders running back room because there's been a lot of heat on Brian Robinson. We also going to look at each position group to pick a player that we need to have a breakout year in order for this team to be successful. It's been a lot of Pierce and Donovan, Izzy on the timeline. Who should we go after? We're going to talk to Mark about it right after this. And remember, if you have any grievances with the team, if you have any compliments for the team, I'm your guy. Call the hotline 24 hours. I can get your message to who it needs to go to. Trust me. 202-525-7284. Call it up. On the other side of this, we're going to have Mark Bulluck.
Yeah, man, people ask that question all the time, man. But look, I'm born into this, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, I bleed Berkeley and gold. I bleed DC. This is my home. This is my squad. Regardless of all the name changes and all that, man, it's Burgundy and gold for me. It's DC for me. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm here, man. I ain't going nowhere. I ain't going nowhere. Do it because you love it, not because it loves you. One beat, one sound, one heart, one love.
Elijah Dallas, we'll see.
Welcome back to Redzone In the Lab podcast. I am Deuce. Joining me today, Mark Bulluck from Over the Pond. How you doing today, sir? How you been?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?
Good. Hanging in there, man. Like, oh, man, it has been such great content this last year plus. Not have to worry about all that extra stuff. Like you said, we got a couple months into the playoff, a month into the playoffs. This is just different territory. Like, I don't even know, like, the 29th pick mark, like, what do we do? Like, I don't remember ever being that low, especially not making no trades or anything.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird one. I feel like I'm very, very behind in terms of draft prep and stuff like that. Normally we're talking about quarterbacks at this point of the year, and we've already had like 2 months of should we take Drake May or Jaden Daniels, or should we trade out and stick with Sam Howell and that kind of thing. So
Oh, man.
it's great to not be having those conversations, but it is very different, and it takes some getting used to. But hopefully, we are going to get used to it because hopefully it means they're making deep playoff runs every year.
Yeah, hope so, right? Let's get right into it. Let's kind of talk about our team after the first wave of free agency. How we add, some of the players that we lost, some of the players that we've gained. Just kind of looking at each position group, and if out of these position groups, Mario, I just want you just to just pull a player out that we need to have a big year, breakout year in order for that group to really shine and be able to help us to get back to the playoffs and make some noise. Let's start with the defensive backs. We're going to include the cornerbacks and the safeties. What player out of that group we need to have a big year from?
Yeah, I don't know if it's breakout necessarily, but I think a lot of that secondary is riding on what Marshawn Lattimore can do, and whether he can get back to the guy he once was. I don't know if he can get back to his peak level. I think that might be beyond him now, but if he can get back to being a good, solid starting cornerback that can cover in man coverage and hold up against good receivers, that would be a big step up from what they've had over the last few years. And if you can get close to that, elite lockdown kind of guy, then you're really talking about like shaping up the defense really well, because then you can start taking out top receiving options, and you can start blitzing a little bit more aggressively, knowing that the coverage is going to hold up. And then the quarterback's going to have to try to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker, and then that can lead to some wayward throws that can create some turnovers. So, and that's what Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn are looking to do on defense. So, I think at corner, the biggest domino to fall there is if Marshawn Lattimore can get back to or get close to what he once was.
The linebackers, of course, it looks like we have the same guys returning, except for Michael Walker. They might bring an extra person in. I know we have Ballore there, but I don't expect him to get any linebacker reps. What about these the linebackers?
Yeah, well, I kind of think that it's going to be pretty much the same group that they had last year. It's going to be Wagner and Luvu most of the time. It would be nice to see Jordan McGee get moved into that rotation a little bit, and maybe you keep Wagner a little bit fresher, and you let McGee get some playing time, or maybe you, if they don't manage to get an edge rusher, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, but if they don't manage to address that, then maybe you move Luvu to the edge a little bit more frequently, and McGee can fit in as a linebacker instead. But I'd like to see McGee get in there and see what he can do, and see whether he can prove that he could potentially take over from Wagner in a year or two's time. It's hard to say right now whether he can do that because we've hardly seen him play. And it's a big ask, obviously, taking over from Bobby Wagner, a future Hall of Famer. But, that they were supposedly very high on him last year before he got injured in training camp, I think it was. So
I remember that.
Yeah. So hopefully he's someone that could step up this year and have a bit of a breakout year.
And that's another thing, like just talking about McGee and some of these young players like Dominique Hampton, Tyler Owens, Baptiste, some of those younger players on defense. Do you think they took their development in consideration going through free agency and prepping for the draft?
To an extent, I think you always want to give your young players a pathway to playing, but you also have had those guys in the building for a year now, and kind of have an idea of which way they're trending and whether they're trending in the right direction, in which case you kind of keep the pathway open for them. Or if you're a little bit more concerned about them, then maybe you might bring in someone to block them, that might block them, but you might feel like you need that extra security. And for the large part, I think they've kind of left those pathways open, and they're going to trust those young guys to try to take a step up, which you would hope that that's the case when that's their first draft class, and they're going into year two, and they have so much roster turnover. You need that first and second draft class to be a foundation of your roster. So so yeah, you hope those young guys can step up, and you don't block their pathway, and that could impact some of your decisions in free agency and stuff. But I also don't think that any of those young guys, like if they'd wanted to go out and get a Myles Garrett or something like that, they're not going to not trade for Myles Garrett because they have John Baptiste on the roster. They're still going to go make that move if that was available, and obviously it turned out it wasn't. So yeah, I think that they've probably taken it into account.
Yeah. The defensive line, including the edge rushers, I'm a little concerned. I think we got enough big bodies, right, for run support. Even some of the safeties like Will Harris we brought in. I think that was one of our biggest issues last year. I think they brought in guys to hopefully fix that or alleviate some of those issues there. But I just don't trust. I mean, I didn't last year either. I just don't trust anyone, Mark, on 3rd and 8, and I need a stop. I just don't trust anyone to get to the quarterback on that defensive line. But how would you look at this defensive line, including the edge rushers?
Yeah, I think it's a group that obviously the defensive ends aren't particularly strong, and they don't have that top pass rusher. I think Dorrance Armstrong is better than what fans give him credit for, but he was a kind of number 3 guy in Dallas behind Lawrence and Parsons, and he was versatile and he could play a lot of different roles. And I think last year he proved he could step up to be the number 2 guy behind a top tier guy. But obviously Washington lacked that top tier guy, so he suddenly had to step up from being a 3 to a 1 rather than just to a 2, and he wasn't that. So I think if they could get a number 1 guy, which is going to be easier said than done, Armstrong would be fine. But I think this staff has a history of, and you see it with how they ran the Cowboys defense. They can manufacture a pass rush. Now, obviously, they had Michael Parsons in Dallas, and that can help manufacture a pass rush on its own. But you saw this play style that they went with, which was, they played a lot of man coverage. They freed up a lot of bodies to add to the blitz, add to the rush, and send 5 or 6 rushes a lot. And if you're sending that many rushes that frequently, that pressure is going to get there more often than not. And it might not necessarily result in sacks, but it's going to result in quicker throws and the ball coming out quickly. And rather than, getting burned down the field and quarterbacks being able to hold on to it forever. And I think we saw it in the blueprint for it in that opening game last year against Tampa. They had something like a ludicrous 60% pressure rate because they just kept blitzing.
Yep.
The issue was that they didn't have any coverage on the back end, and Baker just threw it over the top of it, and that was the bigger issue. And hopefully now they've done some things to shore up the secondary, as we talked about with Lattimore and brought in Jonathan Jones, and Sanders still hopefully is taking a step forward as well. And that could hold up, let the coverage hold up, and then they can get back to that blueprint of blitzing a lot of guys and manufacturing the pass rush that way. So I don't think it's the end of the world if they don't manage to find this great defensive end that can let you get pressure consistently with 4. But that would be very nice to have. And I certainly think they'll be looking quite heavily in the draft for someone that can provide them that.
Let's go to the offensive side of the ball. Let's start with the offensive line. Of course, the bombshell out of nowhere trade for Laramie Tunsil was a big surprise. How do you see Laramie? Because I believe that elite left tackles, as we've seen down through the years, can play well into their 30s. How do you feel about Laramie Tunsil?
I loved the trade. Not giving up a first round pick and getting one of the top left tackles in the league is a great decision. I think it took some of the pressure off them. I like Brandon Coleman, and I think he showed a lot of promise in his first year. For a third round pick to play that much a left tackle was good, but he also required a lot of help. And you saw that when they didn't have him with chip help from either a tight end or a running back or even a receiver, he would quite often struggle when he was left on his own. And that you can have that on one side of the line. You can't have it on both. And they managed to have it. They had it on both last year with Wiley at right tackle and Coleman at left. And so they would have to keep 2 guys in to chip on every play, which is 2 of your 5 eligible receivers not out running routes. So then you only have 3 guys running routes, and you're very limited in what you can do. So by bringing in Tunsil, that is a guy that shouldn't require anywhere near as much help as what they gave Coleman last year. That means that the help can be focused on the right side of the line, and you can still get a 4th receiver out running a proper route. So that opens up the playbook a ton. So I love the move for Tunsil. I also think he's a really, really good player. I got to study a few games of him when they made that trade, and the feet are so clean, so smooth. He doesn't get beat for speed. He doesn't get beat when guys try to convert to power. He's got really good hands, great hand placement. He's so aware of different blitzes and stuff. He helps out the left guard a lot by pointing out guys and stunts and blitzes before they happen. So I think he's a really, really good player. So I think it was a terrific move.
Out of the O-line, which player, and I know Cosby's going to be out for some time next year, but what player out of that O-line do you want to see a big jump next year?
Coleman would be the one that if he can jump up, then you're talking about like Tunsil's obviously a guy you've got now entrenched as probably your best offensive lineman. I think Tyler Biadasz showed last year that he could be a really good offensive lineman. He played through some injuries and stuff last year, still played at a decent level when he was injured, but when he was healthy, he played at a really high level.
Yeah, really high. Yeah.
And so that's two really good foundational pieces of the line. Sam Cosmi had more inconsistencies than I would have liked to have seen from him last year. His highs were very, very good, like elite level guard play, but his low reps were really bad. And I'd like to see him even that out and not have those inconsistencies. But I'd expect him to get that kind of progression once he gets back healthy and not be as inconsistent. So I would consider that three really strong foundational pieces. If Coleman can then step up, and whether it be at right tackle or left guard, and it sounds like they're going to give him a chance at right tackle first, either one, if he can become a decent level starter, you've suddenly got four foundational pieces on the offensive line. And when you look at the best teams in the NFL, you look at the Eagles, they have 5 very good offensive linemen. You look at the Chiefs, they when they built their team around Patrick Mahomes the second time after losing that Super Bowl, they went out and they invested draft picks in 2 offensive linemen, Trey Smith and Creed Humphreys, who they've now paid massively. They went and gave a big free agent contract to Joe Thuney. They got Orlando Brown to play left tackle, and they brought in a big free agent right tackle who hasn't quite worked out for them as well. But they've invested a lot in the offensive line, and you see the best teams in the league have good offensive lines to protect the quarterback. And I think you can see that Jaden Daniels has all this potential, and he clearly can elevate a lesser skill position group. We saw that last year, but he needs to be able to be kept upright. And the offensive line, if you have that 4 very strong pieces, then I think you're looking at a really good foundation of the offense.
Let's take a look at the wide receivers. I never. How do you look at Debo? Do you look at him as a true wide receiver 2, or more of the gadget weapon type player?
More of a gadget weapon type guy at this point. He can do some of the stuff that they wanted a wide receiver 2 to do. But the profile that they had in this type of offense, it's a kind of an odd offense because they want to use so much tempo and get lined up so quickly. Those receivers on the outside have to be able to play both the X and Z receiver role based on what hash mark they align on. So if they're aligned on the right hash mark, the guy on the outside to the left, it becomes the Z receiver. But if they align on the left hash mark, he becomes the X receiver. So those outside guys have to do a lot of the same stuff. And obviously, Terry McLaurin's a really well-rounded player. He has the speed to go deep, but he also can win underneath with route running, and he can take the short stuff and break tackles and all of that kind of stuff. Finding a second guy like that is very hard to do. But I think the profile that they showed last year that was most effective was Noah Brown, where he was a guy that could run good routes, knew where to be and when to make his breaks, could separate enough. And obviously with Jaden being so good at timing and rhythm throws, he would accentuate that separation by getting the ball out so early with good anticipation. So I think that's kind of the profile, the kind of big physical kind of outside guy that runs good routes, breaks at the right time, gets to the right spot, knows where he needs to be to make himself available to the quarterback. That's kind of the guy that they want on the outside more than what Debo does on the outside, where Debo can run the kind of deep overs off play action and the shallow crosses and stuff like that, where you get the ball in his hands and you let him go to work after the catch. But you don't want him running a 12-yard curl on 3rd and 7 to convert on first down and make sure he's running the exact right number of steps at the exact right point and breaking at the right time. Like that's just never been his game. So I view Debo as a guy they're going to move around a ton. They're going to manufacture him touches the way they did with Zacchaeus and to an extent De'Ami Brown last year. Obviously, lots of screens and RPOs, moving around in the backfield and in the slot and stuff like that. All the different things you can do to get him the ball in his hands in space and let him go to work after the catch. So that's kind of how I view Debo. I don't view him as a true number 2 in terms of what they want in an outside receiver. He'll be the number 2 in terms of the guy that's getting the ball most frequently and the most production, assuming he stays healthy, obviously. But I don't view him as what you would class a number 2 receiver in a normal offense.
Which player? Because I don't know. Like, which player out of this wide receiver room you need to, really needs to step up? Because I'm not too confident in this wide receiver room. Are you confident in the wide receiver room? One, and who you think needs to step up to make this like a competent wide receiver room outside of what Jaden can do and how he can multiply them?
Sure. I feel better about the receiver group now than I did entering the offseason, and obviously Debo helps that a lot. And if Debo can step up back to, he's never going to be the guy he was in that outstanding, what was it, 2021, I think it was.
Yeah.
He's not going to get back. He's not getting back to that. But if he's, somewhat close to the Debo Samuel that we all know, then I think it's kind of been overblown as like, oh yeah, we get Debo, but he's on the downswing of his career. If he gets back to anywhere near that in this style of offense, the way Cliff is creative with those kind of pieces, he's going to get a ton of touches, and he's going to have the opportunity to create a ton of yards and be very, very productive. So I think he's a very good weapon in this style of offense. So I feel better about having Terry as your number 1 receiver, Debo as you kind of move around, manufacture touches guy. I think bringing back Noah Brown made sense, as I talked about, being that kind of safety blanket on the outside. He's going to run the right route, be at the right spot. He's physical in the run game as well, can block and all that kind of thing. And then obviously, behind that, there's a lot of question marks, and you hope Luke McCaffrey can step up and develop into that kind of power slot role that I think he was drafted for. But I guess that's a work in progress, and we'll see. After that, it's a bunch of, guys that may or may not make the roster.
Yeah. The running back room. I heard you on, I think it was Gandhi. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. And the thing with me and B-Rob, Mark, is I think before he got injured, he was playing really good football. I think he's playing some of the best football as a pro. The injury happened, and it seems like he himself was rushing it back. Like he couldn't finish games. He would come out in the first, different things like that. And it just seems like he wasn't like hitting the holes, or he wasn't being aggressive from what we used to see in B-Rob. But what's your take on B-Rob this past season and going? Because a lot of people want to just cut him, just to cut him.
Yeah, I think he gets a bit of a rough ride from a lot of Washington fans. And, you look at the raw numbers, and especially down the stretch last year, and you can see, like, yeah, the numbers weren't great. But, I mean, you watch what he was trying to run behind. The offensive line did not block particularly well down the stretch last year. And part of that was down to injuries. Like we talked about, Tyler Biotish was playing hurt a lot, and that impacted them. Some of it was down to scheme. Like to start the year, when they were running the ball really well, they did a really nice job of being extremely varied with their scheme, that they legitimately pulled every offensive lineman in either direction. And when you can do that as a running attack, that makes it really hard for a defense to anticipate what's coming. Like if you just run outside zone every time, then the defensive line knows which gaps they need to get into and who's going to block them. And sure, you might run it well and you might displace guys, but they at least know what's coming. If you're on one play pulling your left guard to the right side of the line, and on the next play you're pulling your right guard outside to the edge, and then on the next play the center's pulling to the left side, it's like at any given time any blocker could potentially block any defensive lineman, and that makes it really hard for defense to stay with that kind of rushing attack. And that's when B-Rob was running really well at the start of the year. But I think with injuries and stuff, they kind of got away from that a little bit. we saw them get back to it a little bit towards the end of the season, and that's when B-Rob started to pick up again. Now, obviously, you don't want your running back to be overly reliant on the guys up front. You want him to be able to create his own, but I think he did create his own for a large part. I mean, I think it's very easy to forget. At the start of the year, there was quite a few times where he would get hit in the backfield and turn it into a 3 or 4 yard gain, and it would stay ahead of the chains. And that was a huge part of the offense. They were so efficient, and they were efficient because B-Rob was able to keep them ahead of the chains early and downs and get them to third and short, third and manageable. So I think B-Rob gets a bit of a bad rep. I do think they lack a bit of explosiveness in that backfield. I think everyone sees kind of what Jahmyr Gibbs did to the Lions offense and kind of took that to another level. And obviously what Saquon Barkley has done to the Eagles offense and taken that to another level. And it would absolutely be great to have a home run hitter that you can rotate in and get 10 carries and he rips off a 50-yarder once a game. That'd be fantastic. But I don't think it's anywhere near the top of the priorities for this roster right now. I think there's a lot more needs ahead of that.
And the rest of the room, like Eckler and C-Rod, like a lot of fans, I think a lot of times when fans are mad at a player, the player behind them they're in love with all of a sudden, right? Kind of like C-Rod got cut like 8 times last year. Like, how are you all so high on C-Rod? But do you think it's an absolute lock that they'll draft a running back?
I don't think it's a lock that they'll draft a running back. I think it's quite likely. It seems to be a pretty good class. I don't know if it's going to be as high as people are hoping for. I know everyone seems to want Henderson from Ohio State. I don't think they'll draft him at 29, and I don't know if he's going to last till they're picking the second round. So unless there's some sort of trade back scenario, I don't think he'll land in Washington. I kind of wonder whether they prioritize other things and kind of circle back for a running back on day 3, maybe in the 4th round, maybe a little bit later than that, and try to add that a little bit more of explosiveness into the room, but not a guy that would demand to be the number 1 running back or the number 2 running back straight away. They'd be someone that would fit into the room and split carries with Robinson and Austin Eckler and the other guys. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be addressed the way that some fans do or would like. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they go get a guy and they draft one at 29 if that's the best player available, possibly. But I would anticipate it being probably a late day 2 if they manage to find a 3rd round pick somewhere, or a day 3 pick that kind of mixes in occasionally.
Yeah. The quarterbacks, I think we all okay with the quarterbacks. I wanted to have Mariota back. I think the quarterbacks in the tight end room was the 2 rooms I thought wouldn't change. And the only thing that had me kind of doubting Mariota was Chip Kelly in Oakland. Once they made that move, I was like, okay, I don't think he's going to go anywhere to be a backup. I think he likes it here. He will come back. And I think they bring Jeff Driscoll back for additional camp. Like, how do you feel about this, about the quarterbacks and Jaden? How much do you think Mariota means to this? Is it more to this offense? Is it more to Cliff, or is it more to Jaden?
I think he's both important to both. What he did last year when Jaden went down injured in that Panthers game.
Mm-hmm.
The offense didn't skip a beat. And they were able to run all the same stuff. And that's what you want from a backup quarterback, right? You want a quarterback that can come in and run the same offense and execute it, still not necessarily to the same level, but can execute it to a decent level and keep the offense running efficiently. And he did that. And it wasn't just, the passing game, but all the read option stuff and the RPOs and stuff. Not every quarterback is athletic enough to do that. Obviously, we know Mariota is, but he filled in pretty well. And that means that if Jaden Daniels does get hurt, and let's hope that he doesn't, but if he does, it's not necessarily season over. They'll go on a losing run. Mariota's a competent backup that they can let them continue running the offense that they want to run. So I think he's an important part. I obviously think that he's obviously a mentor to Jaden, and they have a lot in common, obviously being former second overall picks, former Heisman Trophy winners, and that kind of thing. Very similar profile of player. And I kind of I think Jaden's a little bit more outgoing than Mariota. I think Mariota's kind of quite more reserved, but I think Jaden's probably more reserved than your typical, rah-rah leader quarterback kind of type. So I think that those personalities probably match quite well. So I think that's a really valuable piece to have. So yeah, I'm not surprised at all they brought Mariota back. I think, as you said, the one was Chip Kelly and was potentially a threat to give him a chance at a starting job. But once that turned out not to be the case, I'm certainly happy to see him back, and I think he's one of the priorities for them to get back.
Yeah, me too. The tight end room. John Bates, $11 million guaranteed, I think 3 years. Ertz came back for another year. Then that kind of leaves Senate. Second round pick. He was 5 for 5, 1 touchdown. So I guess the stats look good in that sense. What do you think it is? Do you think it was more? Because I think it's more Ertz just producing it to where they didn't really expect for him to produce, or is it more so Senate just needs time to be able to learn this, learn that, or learn this?
I think Sinnott does need some time to develop. I do think his pathway was blocked a little bit because Ertz, as you say, Ertz had this connection that I don't think anyone was expecting to have that level of connection with Jaden Daniels. And he was so key and so clutch in third down and red zone stuff that he merited being on the field whenever he could be on the field. So Sinnott wasn't going to take any of the tight end one receiver reps off of Ertz, and he shouldn't have done.
Exactly.
And then you look at John Bates, and Bates is widely considered one of the better blocking tight ends in the league. So when you bring in 12 personnel to try to run the ball, John Bates is going to, you're keeping Ertz on the field for the receiving threat, and John Bates is going to be the one that comes in and blocks. So there wasn't really a spot for Sinnott to come in. They did some 12 personnel play action stuff, and they used him as a fullback sometimes on those read option plays, and he did a really nice job on those. I think he showed a lot of potential as a blocker. We didn't really get the chance to see him much as a receiver. They had a few chances early in the year where Jaden kind of missed him on a few deep shots, but largely he was kind of irrelevant in the passing game, and we didn't get to see him give many opportunities. And I'm not hugely sure if we'll get to see that this year either, because coming out of college, he was quite a raw receiver. He didn't have the kind of polish, the route running ability, the nous to know when to, sit in a void in a zone and how to kind of attack leverage the way Ertz does. And so the way he was successful as a receiver in college was the kind of the shallow crosses, the deep over routes. You get the ball in his hand, you let him run after the catch and be physical. And you could do those kind of things with him, but you also think they just traded for a guy called Deebo Samuel, who you want to do all those things with as well. And you would probably rather have Deebo get the ball in his hands than your third string tight end. So I do wonder how restricted Sinnott's role will be again this year, but I would like to see him on the field a little bit more. I'd like to see him given the chance to be that kind of fullback, a little bit move around, like hybrid fullback, tight end, H-back kind of thing. And maybe give Ertz a little bit more of a spell when, obviously, on third down in key situations, 2-minute drill stuff, you want Ertz on the field, but maybe to protect Ertz and let him stay healthy, you give Sinnott a little bit more reps on, say, first down or second down and stuff like that.
What's the weakest position group on the team?
I would say probably defensive end. I made a good speech about Armstrong earlier, saying he's a good number 2 and stepped up to that, but was having to do a higher role than that. And I think he is a good piece, but he is just a piece. And outside of him, they don't really have many good pieces. They have guys that can fill roles, and they have guys that have some intriguing upside to them and stuff. But if they have the same issue that they had at the start of last year, where their coverage just doesn't hold up, and they have to resort to playing a bunch of zone with 2 safeties back deep, and they can only rush 4, they're going to be in trouble. And you can try to, as I say, manufacture some of that stuff around that. You maybe play like Kinlaw as a heavy defensive end. You maybe move Johnny Newton out there as a heavy defensive end. You try the simulated pressure stuffs where you're attacking protection schemes, and you're hoping that they had a lot of success last year where offenses were expecting Luvu to blitz, so they would slide the protection to Luvu, and they'd drop Luvu in coverage, and Wagner would blitz from the other side, and they just play basic Tampa 2 coverage, and it would be a simulated pressure, but Wagner would come free a lot, and they had a lot of success doing that. So you could lean into that a little bit and explore that kind of stuff, but it's hard to live in that kind of world. It'd be nice to be able to trust your top defensive end to help generate a ton of pressure and be able to rush 4. And obviously, as I said, if they have the coverage on the back end, they can then manufacture that pass rush and blitz more and make it work that way. But if that coverage doesn't hold up, then I think you'd see that defensive end group be rather exposed.
And that takes us to the edge rushers. Pierce, Donovan, I call him Izzy, make it easier for me. My favorite guy is Donovan. I watched some tape. I mean, the things that he's able to do on the field at the age that he's at on a college level should not be overlooked. For me, Paris is a little smaller frame. I think he has the fastest get off out of the edge rushers. But it just seems like if he got a good tackle that leans on him throughout the game, it kind of slows him up. He doesn't really finish to me. He should have had like 12, 13 sacks last year. So how do you feel about those two? What type of impact would they have on the team? If both of them are there, who does GM Mark pull, draft, or pick at that point?
So I don't love either of them.
Okay.
There are things to like about both of them, and I would lean more towards Ezeraku than Pierce, because Ezeraku has an elite trait to me, which is the ability to dip and bend around the edge. So that is something you can't really teach. You either have that kind of ability or you don't. And so and that's really, really hard for offensive tackles to stay with. If some guy is able to get so low and dip so low and bend around the edge, and have the kind of hip flexion and the ankle flexion to turn that corner so tightly, it's really, really hard to stop that. Now you can, like, the more athletic tackles in the NFL will be able to cut off his speed, and he will need to learn how to set guys up and how to more consistently swipe away hands to clear that path to the edge so that he can use that elite trait that he has. That's stuff that he will need to work on. But that's stuff that you can, in theory, at least coach up. Pierce is a frustrating guy. I said this on Standing's podcast the other day. He plays like he's a power rusher when he's a speed guy. And I think the analogy I ended up coming to was like he's a cat in a dog in a cat's body, or a cat in a dog's body. Like he has an amazing burst, as you say, this great get off, and his first step quickness is fantastic. He can threaten just about any tackle for speed, but he doesn't use it. He'll occasionally use it, but he more often than not, he'll use this kind of stutter step. And the stutter step is a really nice change up for speed rushers. It gets offensive tackles timing and footwork completely thrown out, and then you can burst by them. But when you use that stutter step so often, they just set up for that. And then if you don't throw that fastball, the speed rush at them, then they have no worry about getting beat for speed because you're just stuttering and stopping every time. So, and then he tried again with that stutter. He does a nice job of getting into guys' chests, but he doesn't take advantage of that leverage. He doesn't have the power to sustain that. So he tries to play, as I say, he tries to play like this power rusher that can bulldoze guys and knock them back, and he does a nice job getting himself into those positions, but he just doesn't have that power. He's a speed rusher, and he doesn't make use of his speed. So he's kind of a frustrating player in my eyes for that. So I'd lean more towards Azaraku, and maybe if you get Pierce, you feel like you can develop a rush plan for him and get him to use his speed more, and then maybe you're looking at potentially a better rusher down the line. But I feel like Azaraku has just, I would bet on the guy with the elite trait, which is that bend and that dip around the edge, and hope that you can coach the rest up.
Got you. I like Azaraku. Thank you for helping me pronounce that. I could just call him Izzy. It's not as hard as I actually thought it was. Trying to do.
I'll be honest. I don't know if it is that.
Here we go. We'll just go for it for now until you have a press conference or something. Yeah, but thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us. Drop your handles, your Substack. I know you got the film review with Big Dig. Don't tell him I said that. Big Doug and Carmi show. But how else can everyone find you?
Yeah, well, Twitter or X, I guess, is at Mark Bulluck NFL, and Substack is markbulluck.substack.com, and you can read all my breakdowns and film reviews and lots of clips and stuff breaking down some of these draft prospects. I've spent the week doing defensive ends, so if you want to see more of Azaraku or Pierce, I've also did Shamar Stewart today, and who else did I do?
FYI, who didn't do any drills today, just got that notification. So he didn't do drills at the combine or at pro day.
Yeah, that worries a little bit.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to worry about with Stewart. But yeah, so that's all going on my Substack. I'm done defensive ends this week. Next week I'll try to dive into some corners and then we'll go from there. So yeah, if people want to.
Yeah, I was so excited when I get the notifications because I am subscribed to Mark's Substack. You should too. When you did Azaraku, I was like, oh yes, I can't wait to read this one because he's my favorite guy. But thank you again, Mark. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you out there for listening and watching. We know your time is very valuable. For you to spend it with us, we absolutely appreciate it. Remember, do it because you love it, not because it loves you. One beat, one sound, one heart, one love.